I'll go ahead and warn you that the content of this particular episode may be all over the place. Because I really don't have a rhyme or reason as to what it is that I'm about to say, what I'm about to talk about. But it actually occurred to me while I was brushing my teeth this morning. It's amazing how certain activities, certain locations elicit certain memories, certain thoughts, certain feelings. This one is connected to a show that my wife and I finished up watching earlier this week. As I'm recording this episode, today is March 27th, 2025. It is a Thursday. A little past 8 a.m. in the morning. On Netflix, there's a show called Pantheon. And I had seen it come up in the listing multiple times. And the artwork was interesting. And the summary was curious. So last week, I believe it was last week, we started watching it. It's an animated show. But don't let that scare you off, because what I've started learning from watching a lot of the animated series that are on Netflix, in some respects, they're a lot better than many of the live action shows that are on Netflix. That's not to say that there aren't good live action shows on Netflix. I mean, there certainly are. Some that are original content by Netflix, their production studio. And of course, movies. Recently, they dropped The Electric State, which has got Millie Bobby Brown and Chris Pratt in it, and it's an interesting, fun movie. It's not a blockbuster by any stretch of the imagination. It was written and directed by the Russo brothers, the ones that are responsible for Infinity War and Endgame, and also are going to be responsible for the next, 2 or 3 movies, starting with Doomsday, which that cast list dropped yesterday. But I'm getting off target here. Animated series. I actually started watching another one called Wolf King. It's based on the Weird World books, I guess. Honestly, I'd never heard of it. But now Pantheon. Pantheon is an interesting exercise in thinking about, in some respect, consciousness, the soul, humanity. What makes us us? So to try to explain what the show is about without giving too much away, because I encourage you to watch it, is it depicts a society where, and if you haven't seen the actual show Upload that's got Robbie Amell in it, it's very similar in, I guess, the technical aspects of it, if you will. The entire concept is uploaded consciousness, or as what they say in Pantheon is uploaded intelligence, UIs. And the way they do it, the process by which a person has to go through to have their, quote, intelligence uploaded into the system is somewhat horrific. You don't survive it. So it's not one of these scenarios where, oh, I can make a copy of my brain and upload it into the computer and now there's two of me. I suppose in a way it kind of solves the issue that has been debated over a multitude of decades when it comes to the transporter systems in Star Trek. At the risk of getting off on a tangent, that debate, if you're not aware, is, are you making a copy and then if that's the case, if you go through the transporter at least once, are you no longer the original? It really does make you stop and if you care about these types of things, or maybe they tickle your brain, it gives you some philosophical questions about what makes us us. There's a particular episode in Star Trek The Next Generation, TNG, where Riker, unbeknownst to him, this is one of those storylines that comes into existence after the show has already been on the air for a number of seasons. And you learn that a few years prior to him being on the Enterprise, and I forget what rank he was at the time, but he was mixed up in a transporter accident. So in essence, what it did is it made a copy of him that managed to make it through the transporter process, and it had to do with some atmospheric magnetic storm, something. I don't remember. It's been a while. Dealing with the planet that he was on. And so as far as the Riker that was on the planet knew, he never made it off the planet. Basically, the matter stream bounced back, rematerialized, reconstituted him back on the planet, but a version of him, the version that we first met when the series started, the one that is still known to this day is Will Riker, made it off the planet, went on with his life. I think there's a 10-year difference. And so then you get these philosophical questions about what makes us us. Because in the episode, and granted this is science fiction, so, take it with a grain of salt. But in the show, both Rikers are him. But at this point in time, when we discover that he's been on this planet for 10 years, they are now two different individuals because of their life experiences. The one on the planet had a completely different decade of experience versus the one that made it out and is now the first officer of the Enterprise. So, circle back around from that tangent. In Pantheon, for you to have your intelligence, your consciousness uploaded into the computer, you're essentially killed. That's just the way the process works. There's no other way around it. So there's only one version of you after this. If you could because again, this is definitely science fiction. I mean, I know we're playing around with this type of technology, seeing if there's a way that we can copy our brains and our intellect and things of that nature. But in this particular science fiction series, your consciousness, your intellect is uploaded into the computer. And the idea is that once you're in there, and they love to use the terms overclock and underclock. Underclock is essentially where you slow down or you go to sleep. Sleep in air quotes. Overclock is where you speed up and do things at multiples of X from what you could normally do. Again, not to try not to give too much away. I mean, you can imagine that if, as we're faced in our modern times now, with the proliferation of artificial intelligence, or what we call artificial intelligence. Right now, they're just essentially large language models. They're better than machine learning, because years ago, that was a pet peeve of mine and a lot of tech people, is that machine learning was being mischaracterized as artificial intelligence. Back then, it was essentially a big decision tree. Now we have systems like ChatGPT, Claude, DeepSeek, all these others that are trained on the massive amounts of data that is available on the internet. And in some respects, when you're talking to, say, ChatGPT, it really does seem like there's a being there. There's an intellect, almost a consciousness, but we're not there yet. And that's one of the major differences between where we are today and where we are in the show Pantheon. One of the big plot points in Pantheon, and I guess I might as well just put a spoiler warning on this episode about this, since I'm getting somewhat detailed, is during the upload, there is a flaw that is introduced so that the uploaded intelligence that is circulating around in the systems eventually starts to degrade and break down. In the only way that I can describe the fix that they come up with is that when the intelligence of an individual is uploaded, that intelligence is stripped of its, what we call, humanity. In this show, they like to call it love, compassion. It's that aspect, I guess, that many people and philosophers and, I don't know, theologians, whatever, would say that aspect of it is what makes us, makes us human. And of course, all of this is done in secret. This is not something that is being sanctioned by the government or governments of the world at that time. It is eventually discovered, and of course, you can imagine that sends up all types of, warning flares, etc. Because it, in a way, to me, it's indicative of the fear that many of us today have if artificial intelligence actually becomes aware, actually evolves into consciousness. And how, as human beings, we like to feel like we're in control. To a point. Some people want to be in more control of things, their lives, other people, unfortunately, than others. And I believe that's one of the philosophical arguments right now we have with artificial intelligence is what happens when you can no longer control it. And at some point, we're probably even looking at the dynamic of master and slave. Because that is slightly touched on a little bit in Pantheon. Eventually, you have this entire society that's just a bunch of, I mean, we're talking billions of uploaded intelligences that takes place in Pantheon. It's a 2-season show. I think each season has 8 episodes. They're roughly like 45 minutes to an hour long, somewhere in there. And you have to start wondering too, if we could do that, are we birthing a new species? And quite honestly, I mean, you can go down the rabbit hole as deep as you want to. I mean, it could connect back to, hell, Battlestar Galactica. Not the original series, but the reboot that was done by Ronald D. Moore and has Katie Sackhoff as Starbuck and Jamie Bamber, I think. Anyway, he's a Brit as Apollo. And how the Cylons evolve over time to where they themselves look and act human, but yet they all started out as robots and some form of maybe diminished artificial intelligence. And then eventually, whether you agree with it or not, the show seems to have jumped the shark at the very end, where you see that we're essentially seeing a precursor to modern society. How did we get here over hundreds of thousands of years, if not millions? I can't remember the exact time span. But at some point, you have the humanoid, the very human-like Cylons being able to mate with actual, air quote, humans. And eventually, you have humanity here on Earth. Or something to that effect. But to me, that gets back to the core of the question: what makes us us? Because if we think in terms of us just being biomechanical beings with some form of programming, if you will, we have a base level programming, and then we basically have a neural network, the brain, and we're a learning computer. But instead of bits and bytes, we learn, we're shaped, our bodies deal with chemical reactions. And I'm not a scientist, so some of these terms that I'm saying are probably not indicative or accurate. So don't bitch at me about that. I'm working with what I got here. theologians, people that are religious in nature and not necessarily even religious, what I would deem religious fanatics, will say that the human animal, we're two parts, technically three parts. So we have the conveyance, the body that gets us from point A to point B. We have the programming or the control system, i.e. the brain, that lets us make decisions on how we get from point A to point B, but also regulates autonomous, if you will, systems in the conveyance, i.e. the body again. Like heartbeat, our heart pumping, breathing, other systems that are regulated that we can't directly affect by necessarily thinking about it. Are there people that can induce themselves into a state where their heartbeat slows down? Sure. We can hold our breath, but at some point, our systems force us to start breathing again. And then we have the third part, which I think is the part that a lot of people we can't get an agreement on. We can't get a consensus on, and that is consciousness / soul. Is consciousness and the soul the same thing? I don't know. As an atheist, I'm inclined to believe that what is characterized as a soul by theological standards doesn't exist. It's just simply consciousness. And it's that consciousness that allows us to form bonds of friendship and love, that allows us to feel sad, hatred, and joy. And that sometimes that's the reason why I think consciousness and intellect are separate, because the old adage is, think with your heart, not your brain, or the other way around. In that statement, I believe that the thinking with the heart, well, that's your consciousness. It's the humanity part of us. If you strip that part out, then an uploaded intelligence is nothing more than just zeros and ones inside of a computer system that would be no different than a large language model. Other than the fact that, could it think? I mean, it's the reason why I'm having this discussion. But eventually, with the lack of a better way of describing the fix that they do in Pantheon, is love is essentially coded into the overall code of a UI, and that fixes the flaw. It's as if when the person's intellect is digitized, is copied and digitized and put into the computer systems, the networks, the internet, that the one thing that it seems like cannot be copied is consciousness, insofar as how it relates to love and sadness and compassion and all of these other things. So why that hit me this morning while I'm brushing my teeth, I have no idea. It was like, you know what, brain, you really haven't been doing your proper thinking exercises. So how about we give you something to gnaw on, to chew on? So yeah, I mean, happy Thursday. Oh, the things we think about when the world seems to be going to shit. Anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about on this beautiful Thursday morning, March 27th, 2025. 670 days, I believe, of alcohol retirement for me. What do you think about any of this that I've talked about? Number one, I encourage you, and I know some of you have a long list of shows that you need to eventually get to, and you might get to all of them in the next 20 years. Talking to you, Sam. But I encourage you to go watch Pantheon. There's a lot of other storylines and plot points that I did not talk about because I didn't want to give the entire show away. You really, really need to go watch it yourself if this type of thing interests you. I had no idea what it was going to really be about, and the more we got into it, and especially with the way season 1 ended, it was like, oh shit. I'm glad I did not see this show when there was only one season, because I would have been a little miffed that I had to wait. And I'm not a very patient person, as most people that know me know this. So I encourage you to go watch Pantheon, Netflix. And when you get to the final episode, let me just say that is one hell of a mind fuck. Kudos to the writers on that one. But aside from the show, whether you're religious or not, whether you identify as a religious person, whether you identify as an agnostic or an atheist, I'm curious to know your thoughts on what makes us us. Do you agree that we could be three parts: the conveyance, the body, the intellect, which is the brain, and then consciousness, which some would equate to the soul? I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and say with 100% certainty that, oh yeah, this is it, because some of these things, it's not tangible. That's the problem. It's not tangible. And I don't know that we'll ever know the answer to that. Some on the religious side will say, well, you'll definitely know once you die, whether you're up there or down there. And of course, I reject that. But at the same time, as an atheist, I do have a tendency to veer away from hardcore atheism that dictates that this is it. When the electrical impulses in our body and our brain and everything just stop, our heart stops beating, we no longer are taking in air, we're dead, that is the it. In a cold, uncaring universe, I get it. I see where that's the thought process. For me, lack of a better way of saying it, but I'll take it on, let's just say faith-wise, because faith is not relegated to just religion. You can have faith in a wide variety of things. I like to think that what makes us us, at least the conscious, the conscious part, the feeling part, you break it all down, we're just electrical impulses, right? That continues to carry on. Now, in what form that does, how, I don't know. Would I bet on it being that way? No. I like to think that that's what will happen. And I don't mean that the soul goes on and goes to a better place or a worse place or anything like that. You know, it's the old, what is it? Matter cannot be created nor destroyed. You can tell I haven't been in school in decades. Or is it energy? Maybe it's both. But the point being that, you know, the body will decay. But the consciousness, I don't know. Chances are that's it. We're done. But I don't know. But what do you think? Do you think we're three parts? Do you equate the consciousness to a version of what religious folks will call the soul? Or is it all in the brain, the intellect, the consciousness? It's all the same thing. And there is no, quote, soul. Let me know what you think. You can leave a comment where this episode resides at callmedonovan.com. You can send a text. Got a text line for the production company, 229-234-1307. You can also call and leave a voicemail if you want to do that. I would love to get some feedback about this, and if you're willing to leave a voicemail, then I would love to include it in a future episode, maybe to revisit this topic. I'm actually trying out a new service for voicemails, so if you'll go to voicecast.app/CMD, that's voicecast.app/Charlie Michael David, CMD, leave a voicemail there. Of course, now that's going to require that, and I tested it, you can do it on a cell phone if you just drive up to it. You can record that way. But if you're at a computer, then you need to have, a laptop that has a microphone or something like that. I will probably eventually get away from using the telephone number, because that's actually a Google number. I mean, I'm not going to hide what it is, but either one will work. 229-234-1307 if you want to send a text. If you want to leave a voicemail, then I encourage you to go over to voicecast.app/CMD. All right, well, that's going to end it for this episode. Thank you for taking the time to listen, and hopefully I didn't hurt your brain too much, because I know it was stressing mine. So until next time, take care of yourself, hug your loved ones, have a fantastic day, whatever day of the week it is that you're listening to this, and hopefully I'll talk to you in the next one. Take care of yourselves. Bye.